On Story is brought to you in part by the Alice Clayburgh Reynolds Foundation, a Texas family providing innovative funding since 1979. On Story, presented by Austin Film Festival, a look inside the creative process from today's leading writers and directors. This week's On Story, a conversation with legendary comedy television writer and producer Larry Wilmore.
Everything in comedy I look as a joke. So I look at stand-up as a joke, I look at sketch as a longer form of the joke. A sitcom, half-hour sitcom, is making the joke stretch out even further, and that joke has different beats to it, and a movie is the longest form of that joke. But there's a central joke at the heart of it. Tootsie, man dresses up as a woman, to become a better man. That's the theme of it, but it really is the joke. How do we tell it?
This episode, Larry Wilmore discusses the comedic path that led him to write for the groundbreaking television shows In Living Color and The Bernie Mac Show.
So my roots are really in the theater, but I was doing stand-up kind of at the same time. So I've always been able to compartmentalize, I guess. I call it scatterbrain, maybe. So I'm writing jokes on one side, joke writing to do stand-up, and then I'm in, I wanted to be a serious actor at the time, doing Shakespeare and all that stuff on the other side. So I really started in theater. The first way that I broke into business was in theater, and it was a show that we wrote through improvisation, so I was a writer, but I didn't, have the identity as a writer. I didn't think of myself as a writer. And, I guess that was writing. And to do stand-up, I had to write and act, so I had no choice but to write. But I still didn't really consider myself a writer. I was writing because I had no choice. It was more of a practical consideration. So I really, in the early days, I considered myself a performer, and I wrote out of necessity, which I still kind of view writing as I write because I have to, It's like, Larry, why do you write? Because I have a deadline, because I got to get this thing done, I loved comedy growing up. My first influence was Flip Wilson. You remember Flip Wilson? Some young people are like, who? What was that? He was a black comedian on television in the 60s, one of the few blacks to have his own TV show at the time, and it was really funny. And he was just a big influence, and that was the first time I thought maybe of doing something like that. Well, Flip Wilson played a lot of characters on the show, and he did one called Geraldine where he dressed up like a woman. Right. And it was just so, Flip Wilson, it wasn't that the jokes were that clever or anything. He was just so funny, He would go, the devil made me do it. And he would do this voice, you better watch it, And just his actions and everything.
Yes, honey.
Now you can be the girl with it.
When you got it, flaunt it.
He would act so fast and everything, and I just found him just infectiously funny, You just fell in love with his comic energy. Steve Martin, like when he came around and Andy Kaufman came around, they really kind of changed the way comedy was being done, So it was almost kind of performance art type of comedy, especially Andy Kaufman. But he did some amazing stuff, and I'm like, when he first came out, you're like, what is he doing? What's going on? But it was so hilarious. Like he would do that thing where on Saturday Night Live where he had a thing playing, and he would just stand there the whole time, and it would play the song, and then it'd come up to a part, and he would lip sync, "Here I come to save the day," And
Mr. Trouble never hangs around when he hears this mighty sound. Here I come to save the day.
I was always attracted to the thinking going on behind the thing. I liked funny, but I also liked something else going on there. One of my favorites at the time when I was in high school was Buster Keaton. I really got into Keaton big time. And a friend of mine had a projector and started collecting films, and we used to watch, God, this is how long ago this was, but we used to watch 16-millimeter prints of Keaton, you know, in his house. And it was so much fun, and I just couldn't believe how smart Keaton was, you know, the stuff that he did. So I was really attracted to that kind of stuff, and I got into Woody Allen at the time. So I was really early on, it was just funny. As I got a little older, I kind of like the smart kind of funny. There was something else going on, you know. And Python, like Life of Brian. Until Book of Mormon, there was nothing as blasphemous as Life of Brian, as far as I was concerned. Okay, so my career before television writing was stand-up comedy, basically, and acting. And but I used to write for other comics just because I would think of a joke and I would give them a joke or that kind of thing. And a friend of mine was a ventriloquist, and I used to write jokes for him, and I started getting paid for that. And so that's the first time I felt like I was actually getting paid to write. It was in the early 90s I decided that the best way for me to really move my career forward was to learn how to write and produce myself and to kind of carve out my own place in showbiz. Because I felt like Hollywood, there's this movie called Hollywood Shuffle. Are you guys familiar with that? It was Robert Townsend's take on black comics in Hollywood. And at that time, Hollywood was really kind of shoehorning you in as a black comic. If you weren't from the ghetto, you know, if you weren't urban, that was the term. I like the term urban. You know, what does that mean? You know, but or Murphonic, as they said in that movie.
What we're looking for is an Eddie Murphy type.
We want somebody who can act like Eddie Murphy from head to toe. That's what we want.
Someone who can dress like Eddie Murphy, to look like Eddie Murphy, to be Eddie Murphy, to give him the actor himself, a Murphy-ectomy, to have a Murphy-like quality, Murphy-esque, to be Murphonic. Okay.
You know, Hollywood didn't really know what to do with you. So I figured the best thing for me to do, because I did a lot of political humor, I did impressions, I did off-the-wall stuff, absurdist stuff. My act was a hodgepodge of different things, you know. But, and in the clubs, it worked really well, but in television, they didn't know quite how to cast me, you know. So I thought, well, let me just try it myself. So my first TV job was a show called Into the Night with Rick Dees. I don't know if you remember Rick Dees. He was a DJ and did the top 10 or top 100, whatever it was. And 6 months after that, I got the job in Living Color. So In Living Color was my really big break. I always said in Living Color, it was the worst of times, it was the worst of times. That's my quote. It truly was the worst of times. But only as a writer, because it was so hard. You know, we had to pitch almost every single day. It was so tough. But it was also very exciting. I worked with some of the most amazing people. You know, I mean, Jim Carrey was before he got really big. You know, the Wayans brothers are all very talented. Jamie Foxx, I never thought he'd be winning an Oscar. I was always attracted to the real politically incorrect stuff, which was most of the show, I guess. But, you know, the men on film, I did a lot of that stuff. Fire Marshal Bill, I could not believe how offensive that was, you know, and that we actually got away with doing it. I mean, a sketch about a guy who was a fire burn victim. I mean, that was amazing to me. And Jim Carrey could transform his face. You know, and he looked like he was really, I'm like, how can we get away with this stuff? You know? But we did, and we kept doing it.
Let me show you something.
Certainly.
Now, say one night you're drifting off to sleep on the couch, and the pipe falls out of your hand like that.
Handyman, he was my favorite. And I wrote a sketch with him and Stevie the Blind Boy Wonder. That was fun. I remember we did a sketch when Sammy Davis Jr. died, and I wrote a sketch with him, with Whoopi Goldberg trying to revive him like in Ghost, you know, where she was channeling him and kind of became
I've gotta be me.
What are you saying? I'm sorry, I'm getting some interference.
I've gotta be me.
That's not my husband.
And we actually got a letter from his wife, Alta V. She was thanking us for that. It was kind of nice, yeah. Remember the guy Reginald Denny, who was, so I wrote a sketch called Reginald Denny's. And it was this commercial where he was advertising this restaurant where you eat in the truck. You can beat me, but you can't beat the service. It was like those kind of jokes, you know. So I did a lot of racy, there was a lot of fun racial humor. That sounds so weird. Fun racial humor, But we used, on Living Color, we used to put what we call decoys into the script. So we would put like a really horribly offensive thing, to mask the actual offensive thing that we wanted to get in there. And they go, you can't do this. You can't do an AIDS joke. What's wrong with you? You can't, but it's funny. We can't, no. All right, we'll take that. Well, can we keep this decapitation joke in there or whatever it was? All right, you can keep that one in. Yes. When I came up with the idea for the show, I came up with the idea for the show independent of thinking of Bernie first. At the time, I wanted to do a show that felt real, that felt more authentic, that didn't feel like the action was being pushed at us, that, we were kind of eavesdropping on the action. That was the feel that I wanted on the show. The Bernie Mac pilot at the time was, I just wanted to tell Bernie's story from an emotional character journey point of view more than a plot-driven, artificial, manipulative point of view, if that makes sense. When I come up with the show for television, I always kind of juggle three things in my head. I don't always think about them consciously, but they're always in the back of my head. The first thing is, I look at it I look at what's going on in the culture, okay? Is there something going on in the culture that I feel like I want to exploit right now, The other thing is, what's going on in me? Is there something in me that's happening that I need to express right now? Is there a problem I'm going through or a life thing that I need to talk about, And is that a television show, right? And then the third one is what's going on in the marketplace? What's actually on television right now? Am I bringing something that's different? When I did the Bernie Mac show, I felt like they all lined up. I really wanted to tell this story about the heartbreak of raising kids. Not the difficulty, but the heartbreak of it, and how difficult it was. And the theme of that show was Bernie feels kids are terrorists and he doesn't negotiate with terrorists, right? That's what it was. And that, to me, was something that, I had seen in my life and I wanted to kind of talk about. It was resonating with me right now because I was just having kids. But I also noticed it was happening in the culture. There was a big culture war with parents and children kind of running the show. And, there was all these things I was seeing on television with parents being reduced to rubble, by their kids, and not knowing how to respond to it, and things like kids' rights and all this stuff. And so I thought, okay, well, that's in the culture. That's nice. And then as far as on television, like I said, there were no single camera shows at the time. The style that I wanted to do was bringing something different to television. Bernie talking directly to the camera, that sort of thing, in the confessional.
Now, y'all children, y'all come on. Let's have some ice cream. Come on. Bernie Mac, why you so strict? Tough love is good for him. I don't play. Never did play. This small, never smiled or nothing. Hate school. Could have had recess.
So I thought stylistically, here's something that's not in the marketplace that I might be able to exploit. So I actually consciously think of that, not while I'm thinking of the idea, but once I have the idea, I kind of look at that. I go, actually, there's a lot of good reasons why this should probably be a TV show. But as a writer, I'm writing my own experience. So I'm not writing his experience. So those kids in those shows represented my life. The son was, my son was going through some sick stuff, and he was kind of the weak thing. And my daughter had that kind of energy of Brianna. And the girl was kind of my sister, who was very contrary and was like that. And it was only the situation that I picked from Bernie's life, but everything else was culled out of my own life. So I'm using his voice to really tell my story, which is really kind of what you want to do as a writer. You can only tell your story. You really can't tell someone else's story. You can tell your story with their clothes on it, maybe.
Hola, él es Juan Fernando Andrés.
Esteban Roel.
Somos los productores y directores del cortometraje
036. Pues sí, la idea surge por Andrea Gomez, que es la guionista, y entonces pues después de un mes y medio volviéndose loca y enfrentándose a la salvaje burocracia española, pues bueno, al final escribió el corto, yo creo un poco como catarsis. Escribió en una mañana, nos lo pasó, y en cuanto lo leímos tuvimos claro que ese corto lo teníamos que hacer nosotros.
Claro, la fecha fue el 2 de enero del año 2011, es decir, fue exactamente después del día 1. Todavía teníamos la resaca del Año Nuevo. Bueno, ahora con ustedes el cortometraje 036. ¿Sí? Que lo disfruten.
Hasta luego.
Espera un momento.
Quería darme de alta en autónomos.
Ventanilla de información, modelo TA1. Lo cumplimenta en esa mesa y después.
Me he traído relleno.
No ha rellenado esa casilla. Vaya a las mesas de la entrada y...
He traído 2 copias, escritas y revisadas.
Le falta el impreso de Hacienda. Y la fotocopia. Muy bien, Rubita. Tú lo has querido. Fotocopia del DNI. Número de cuenta. Fotocopia de la tarjeta de la Seguridad Social. Fotocopia de los impresos de Hacienda. Doble fotocopia del modelo 036, numerado y grapado.
Hi, I'm Kevin Harger. I'm director and production designer. And I'm Chris Bourke, and I was a cinematographer and editor, and we both co-wrote Love, Emily. So we kind of came up with the story. One night I was walking back from the library, and for some reason I had this idea pop into my head about an older gentleman who's at kind of a high-class art show, and he just seems out of place, and so he has to use the restroom, and when he goes in there's no toilet paper, so he has to resort to using the artist's pamphlet. We figured that we could reach kind of a larger audience, maybe connect with more people if we brought down the age group a little bit. There's kind of an interesting dynamic between boys and girls at that age, and the whole, I guess, first idea of first love. The script just came so naturally, and it was funny, and so it wasn't necessarily that we chose to do a comedy. It was that this funny story just kind of it grew. This film couldn't have been anything other than a comedy. This is our short film, Love, Emily. Enjoy.